Take a look at a modern supply chain. A single computer chip might cross 30 borders before it ever reaches your phone. In a system this tightly wound, absolute national independence is a myth. Influence in this landscape is defined by who controls the nodes, the physical and financial gateways that every other nation is forced to pass through. For decades, one small group held a monopoly on those gateways. In 1975, the leaders of the world's wealthiest liberal democracies formed the Group of Seven. The G7 was a closed, highly exclusive club. They coordinated macroeconomic policy and effectively wrote the rules for the global economy. They managed trade, dictated debt relief, and steered international finance, all while deliberately keeping rising demographic giants like India and China out of the room. That exclusive grip held until the fall of 2008. When the global financial crisis started on Wall Street and triggered a worldwide panic, the West quickly realized its own wealth was no longer enough to stop the bleeding. Saving the global economy required mobilizing the financial firepower of emerging markets. Almost overnight, an obscure coalition of finance ministers known as the G20 was elevated to a leader-level summit. They injected unprecedented liquidity and stabilized the markets. The Italian philosopher Antonio Gramsci famously wrote, "The old world is dying, and the new world struggles to be born." In the aftermath of 2008, the unipolar order was visibly fracturing. While the G20 managed the immediate crisis, it left the underlying architecture of global finance completely intact. Western nations maintained their voting dominance in the IMF and the World Bank, and the US dollar remained the primary reserve currency. That structural inequality fostered a deep, growing resentment across the global South. That resentment materialized into a direct challenge. In 2009, Brazil, Russia, India, and China held their first leader summit, soon adding South Africa to form BRICS. They united over a shared belief that the Western-dominated economic system was explicitly stacked against their interests. What started as a Wall Street acronym has rapidly gained mass. The bloc has now aggressively expanded into BRICS Plus, inviting major energy producers and strategic players across the Middle East and Africa to join the ranks. To understand why this matters, look at this chart tracking global purchasing power over the last 2 decades. In the year 2000, the G7 controlled over 40% of the global GDP, while the original BRICS nations held just 21%. Watch the trend lines. By 2024, the G7 share has shrunk down to 30%, and BRICS has steadily climbed past them, crossing the 35% mark. They are using that massive economic leverage to build parallel financial structures. The bloc established the New Development Bank to bypass the conditions of the World Bank, and they are actively coordinating ways to settle international trade in local currencies, steadily chipping away at the dominance of the US dollar. But look beneath the shared anti-Western rhetoric, and the coalition is full of friction. India and China are locked in a tense border standoff in the Himalayas and are actively competing for diplomatic influence across Asia and Africa. These internal rivalries mean BRICS is not a cohesive military or ideological alliance. It is a strategic syndicate of convenience. Members use the group to maximize their economic leverage on the world stage, even as they compete fiercely with each other behind closed doors. Meanwhile, the traditional arenas for global diplomacy are seizing up. Massive legacy institutions like the United Nations Security Council are routinely gridlocked by great power vetoes, making consensus on urgent crises nearly impossible. Because those broad frameworks are paralyzed, countries are pivoting to something much faster: minilateralism. Instead of trying to get 200 nations to agree on a massive treaty, modern governments are forming agile, ad hoc coalitions of the willing to target highly specific objectives. Take the Indo-Pacific. When the United States, the UK, and Australia wanted to project hard military power, they didn't push for a broad UN resolution. They formed AUKUS, a deeply integrated, highly exclusive pact built entirely around sharing sensitive nuclear submarine technology. But military force is only one tool. To secure tech supply chains and monitor maritime traffic, the US partnered with India, Japan, and Australia to form the Quad. This is a diplomatic shield focused on soft power, coordinating everything from clean energy initiatives to vaccine distribution without triggering the obligations of a formal military treaty. The rigid, binding alliances of the Cold War are fading. In their place, nations are deploying these tactical strike teams, spinning up highly focused partnerships when a threat or opportunity arises, and adjusting them just as quickly. This brings us to the true complexity of the 21st century power game. This network matrix maps out the major global blocks, and it reveals a critical shift. Unlike the Cold War, nations are no longer forced to pick a single side. Look at India. It sits right at the overlapping intersection of BRICS, the G20, and the Quad. This is the doctrine of strategic autonomy. Middle powers like India, Brazil, and South Africa are playing an inside and outside game simultaneously. They partner with Russia and China to demand financial reforms while maintaining deep diplomatic and trade ties with Washington and Europe. They are maneuvering through these overlapping alliances to secure critical resources for the future. They need to lock down lithium, secure semiconductor supply chains, and build infrastructure for artificial intelligence. Geopolitical leverage has shifted toward diplomatic elasticity. The most resilient nations are those with the network density to engage with rival camps simultaneously, turning overlapping memberships into strategic room to move. This ability to move through the matrix ensures a nation is present at every negotiation and heard by every side. True power in this era belongs to those who can navigate the intricacies of multi-alignment, sitting at every table and speaking to all sides, while remaining strictly dependent on no one.